All right, welcome everybody. So last class we got into psycholinguistics, specifically focusing around child language acquisition. So today we're going to look at adults. So how do adults learn a language? Is the way that they learn the language similar or different to how children learn? We'll be talking about some things like that. My own background, as you guys know, I learned Spanish at 20 years of age. I had really no background in the language whatsoever. So I learned Spanish as an adult. It was very, very challenging to say the least. I felt like after 2 years, I had a pretty good grasp of the spoken and the listening part of the language. Reading was okay, but it was a difficult process. And after I learned Spanish with the migrant workers up in Northern California, eventually I majored in Spanish at Brigham Young University. Wow. So I have a good grasp of the linguistics, the structure of Spanish, the verb tenses, all those things, the literature, everything. In addition, after I completed my graduate degree in English composition with an emphasis on teaching English as a second language, I became interested in helping ESL students learn the language. So since about 1991, I've been teaching English as a second language to mostly international students who come over to the United States. They have an F1 visa, so they have permission to study here for a certain X number of years. And I've been helping them ever since. So I have a pretty good background when it comes to this area. Okay, so let's get started with our topics today. So let's take a look at some different examples. And there's not really a right or wrong answer here, to be honest with you. I just want to discuss a little bit about different things relating to adults learning a language. Okay, so number one, we have, is it easier for children or for adults to learn a second language? What do you guys think about that?
Children.
And why is that?
I think because their minds are still faster developing, like for us, you get told your frontal lobes are fully developed at a certain age when you're an adult. So I just think when you're a kid, I don't know. Yeah, your mind is still developing. They're sponges.
So our students are saying that easier for children to learn, their minds are young, their brains are developing. So maybe it's easier for children to acquire a language than it is for adults. Anybody can learn, right? It's possible anybody can learn, but it seems like children they don't have that first language completely set in the brain like adults do. When adults, I have a student right now, he's 51 years old, he is from China, and he's learning English. Really, his English when he started this semester, it was low intermediate level. And now he's more intermediate level, but he is so diligent. This guy is taking notes in class. He's studying when he goes home. He's practicing. And he's barely moved into the intermediate level now. That's after a whole semester. So it has been very challenging. And I think adults find it very challenging. So I agree with you guys. I think it's easier for children, although everybody can learn at any age, but it seems like it's much easier for children to pick up the language. Okay, how about number two? So we have a term in psycholinguistics, we call it language transfer. So sometimes the first language maybe positively or negatively affects the learning of a second language, right? In certain cases, like in Spanish, you have telephone is teléfono, or automobile is automóvil, or carro, right? So you have what's called cognates, right? You have words that are maybe similar in one language to another. So in those cases, those vocabulary words will be positive, but then you have a word like embarazada, to me means embarrassed, not pregnant, but that's going to throw me off because I think, because embarazada sounds like embarrassed if you read it especially, right? And then teléfono means telephone. So initially when I saw the word embarazada, I was tricked and I thought it meant one thing when it meant another. So that would be more of maybe not a helpful thing. So what do you guys think about that? So how does a first language have an impact on the learning of a second language?
I don't know, because when I think of English, like I'm already thinking of like the word like there or something, like there's they are, there's
Okay.
there, it's over there, like they're in a group or something, like I
Okay.
just, I don't know.
Homophones, so you have a
Yeah.
homophone, two words have the same phonetic representation, but are spelled differently
Yeah,
and work differently grammatically.
yeah, I was just thinking of that. I mean, I don't know if that like necessarily relates, but I'm just thinking like, wow, like English really is probably, the hardest language to learn, for people who aren't, English speakers. So I'm trying to think how it can relate to maybe, like Spanish or,
Okay,
um,
well, let's look at Spanish. So Spanish, we know from syntax, it puts the adjective after the noun, not before the noun,
yeah,
right? In Spanish, you have masculine and feminine type nouns. You have el libro, la silla, right? So you have some differences in one language versus the next, right? Can you think of maybe something that might be, I think positive with Spanish might be similar sounding words like teléfono, telephone, right? Similar cognates that work in both. So sometimes the vocabulary might be fairly easy or easier than, I mean, what if I'm learning Chinese? I'm looking at the characters. There's not going to be much positive transfer at all with that, right?
yeah.
Because it's a totally different writing system. So depending on what the differences or the similarities are, right, from one language to the next, that'll have a big impact on whether the first language positively or negatively affects the learning of a second language. I told you guys that Chinese has 0 verb tenses, none. So yesterday I go to the store, today I go to the store, tomorrow I go. It isn't yesterday I went. It's not today I go and not tomorrow I will go. They don't really change the verb. The verb stays in the base form. So a Chinese speaker learning English, trying to get a grasp on the 12 verb tenses, that's going to be a challenge because they're not used to the verb tenses. On the other hand, my Chinese students tell me that the written system of English, the letters A, B, C, D, they find that really, really easy compared to the characters they use in their language. So their handwriting, I mean, my Asian students have absolutely the best handwriting of anybody. It's incredible because they're so used to that analytical complex system of characters, kanji, all of that, right? Now, my Arab students, they're used to reading from right to left, not left to right. So can you imagine trying to read in a new language, right? So if you look at a book in Arabic, it goes to the end, that's the beginning of it. And it starts at the very last page and goes to the first part of it.
So is that where like, like anime, like reading books came from? Because like, how like, I don't know if you know, but like you have to read backwards when it comes to like those books and stuff, like the Korean books, like you have to read, like for anime, you read backwards, starting at the end, my bad. And then you go to the very beginning. So is that maybe where they got it from like, is what you're saying Arabic?
It might be, I can't confirm.
Okay.
I don't know. Okay, so there's instances where the first language can positively or negatively affect the learning of the new language, right? I'll give you 2 examples of 2 students that I'm working with right now. One of them is from Thailand and the other is from France, and I'm helping both of them on Fridays with accent reduction. So in this case, students in Thailand, they don't really pronounce final consonant sounds. So a word like wash becomes wa, or grab can become grab. So same thing with Vietnamese, right? So when I'm working with Thai students and I'm doing accent reduction practice, I have to really focus a lot on the medial and the final consonant sounds and the pronunciation of those sounds. And it's a really difficult process. French students, they have really, really tough time learning how to pronounce English. French and English are very different that way. So again, I'm working with both of these students, and in both cases, there's a lot of what I call negative language transfer. The differences in the first language are affecting how they approach the learning of the new language. How about 3? Can adults learn a language without explicit instruction? Is it possible?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it's possible.
Okay, so it's possible. In many cases, maybe not likely,
Yeah,
but it's possible. My son's been learning Russian right now. He's 13 years old. He's gotten to the point where the syntax, he needs somebody to explain it. He's struggling. He was able to master the alphabet relatively quickly, and he could figure out what sounds represent what, and that wasn't a big problem. But what it looks like with the syntax, my son needs some explicit instruction to learn Russian grammar, which is a big challenge. It's morphologically, the word order is very flexible and very wide open with Russian compared to English. So we can say 3, of course, they can learn without explicit instruction. However, most adults get explicit instruction when they learn a new language. They typically will do that. How about 4? Is it more important as a teacher to teach the grammar rules, or should the teacher focus more on the communicative approach to teaching? Anybody just showing up here? We're just kind of going over some basic kind of ideas about adult language acquisition. What would you guys do?
sorry, can you repeat the question one more time? I was writing, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, wait a minute here. Sorry, I didn't have it here. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Didn't have it. Now you can see it. Yeah. Should we, if you're teaching ESL, should you focus more on the grammar or focus more on the communicative approach? It means fluency versus accuracy, or accuracy before fluency. These are debatable
Accuracy
topics,
before-
by the way.
Accuracy before fluency, I would think, but
So learning how to, form the sentences and the verb tenses and kind of get used to how the language works grammatically, and then move to the more communicative approach.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Grammar rules first.
A lot of teachers, believe it or not, they will focus a lot on this, even before that. But I could see either way, right? You could, and in our English language program here at California State University, we actually have a grammar class. We do. We have a grammar class at the different levels. We have level 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we do teach specific grammatical concepts in each of those courses to kind of help them. And we also focus a lot, like the class I'm teaching right after this, it's a presentation skills class, and we have a lot of speaking practice. We have a lot of pronunciation practice, and then we also have listening. I have them listen to lectures, take notes. They have homework assignments. They go online. They'll listen to a 5-minute lecture several times. They'll take down notes as completely as they can. Then they complete the comprehension exercises online. Okay, let's go to number 5. So it says here, what's the connection between understanding culture
bless you.
and learning a second language? Is it important for second language learners to identify with a new culture? Why or why not?
Yes.
So you have a student who said yes, okay,
It kind of reminds me of like, because I learned Spanish as an adult,
okay.
just like you, and
Oh, you
so,
did?
yeah, and so, what I was gonna say is, it kind of makes me think about, yeah, like, even my professor, like, he'll like tell us like certain, like culture and whatnot with Spanish, and I find it very interesting, and like, what they eat, like maybe, yeah, like even when it comes to a certain holiday or something, like, so it could be fun, I feel, because you're kind of like, even though you're in a classroom setting, it's almost like you're kind of stepping into it a little bit,
Okay,
like as if like you can almost taste it. Is that
Yeah.
crazy? Nothing. But I don't know. I kind of think of it like that.
You get more of an experience with it in a sense, and you kind of get that more, you gotta understand the language as well as like learning the language.
okay. There's a research out there where if a person identifies with the culture, and they want to become part of it and understand it, they say that I don't know if this makes any sense, like the effective filters to learning the language can be more open and the brain can be more receptive to learning the language. If you have a more negative kind of attitude toward the culture of the language that you're trying to learn, it can be more difficult to acquire that language. See if we can give you an example here. Yeah, I've had some cases over the last 2 years with the pandemic. Anybody who shows up for an ESL class online, these people are serious. I mean, more than serious. But before the pandemic, we used to get like hundreds of students in our EOP program, and there would be a small percentage of them that were just not motivated at all. So when they went home every day, they would just watch TV in their own language. They would only talk to people in their own language. They really didn't do anything in the new language. And they were here because their parents forced them to come here, or they were here because they couldn't get admitted into a college in their own university, so they had to come here. Like in Korea, Japan, China, there's only X number of universities for really way more students than is possible to go to those schools. So you can imagine the admission requirements are almost impossible. I mean, you have to be like a valedictorian or almost something like that before you get admitted into some of these schools in these other countries. So they'll come over here. But if they don't really identify with the new culture, I've seen students actually get worse at the end of the semester in terms of their English language proficiency. They got worse, not better, even though they were here, because they weren't really identifying with the culture. They weren't really participating. They weren't really doing anything. They just continued to speak in their own language. As soon as they got out of class, that's all they did. So you might know people who speak a different language. They've been here 25, 30 years, and they haven't made any improvements whatsoever, right? It's entirely possible. You could live in the United States and speak Korean and not really have to learn English if you know where to live and whatever. There's neighborhoods, all Korean, right? You got Hispanic neighborhoods. It's entirely possible. There's Armenian, Arabic, they're just all over, right? You can do that. So there seems to be a connection between understanding and learning the culture and also helping to facilitate what we call second language acquisition there. Okay, how about number 6? It says there's three ingredients to second language acquisition, right? We have exposure, we have time, we have motivation. So let's think about the inner relationship among these three things. So exposure, time, and motivation. So right now, I told you I have a Thai student, right? So I met her for the first time yesterday. So she's going to pay me every Friday $100. So for 2 hours, I'm going to help her the first hour with pronunciation, speaking, accent reduction, blah, blah, blah. Second hour is more writing. So she's going to do a writing practice test. She's going to have that ready. She'll show up on Friday for 2 hours. Who is this person? This is an orthopedic surgeon from Thailand, a doctor. Probably around 30, 35. I don't have no idea how old she is, but she's really motivated. By getting a high score on the TOEFL exam, it helps her to clear her medical license to be a doctor. So if she decides to practice medicine in another country other than Thailand, right, she has to have really, really good English. She has to be able to speak English, write it, understand it, and so on. So she's motivated. I mean, she knows that by learning and improving English, she already speaks great English, right? Has a very heavy accent. That's why she's contacted me. Writing skills are sketchy, this and that. But so let's look at the three things. So exposure, which means the input, the listening, the reading, the speaking, all of that, getting the exposure to the language, but getting that exposure over an extended period of time and then being motivated. So how are these three things connected when it comes to second language acquisition? This is our question. I have no idea if any of your comments are even going to show up in the video. I don't know, maybe not. I don't know if it'll even hear you, so just
Yeah,
speak
it's
loudly if you
giving
can.
For like exposure, yeah, like I completely agree, like whether it's maybe like looking at videos on a screen or even just being in person, like, you have to kind of, I think, see what type of learner you are, like, because some people have to physically see the teacher and watch their mouth move and, like
Yeah.
hear it in person, right? Like, and it could even be maybe, yeah, difficult when you're like maybe over a computer screen and like you're talking into the audio and maybe like a certain letter isn't pronouncing as well as it would in person. I don't know if that makes sense. So I think of like exposure, and also, are you putting in the time and practice to like talk to someone in that language, like, maybe even like reading your assignment to them or something, and then they give you feedback, but then, yeah, again, them coming to you like with the motivation, she's that motivated to see you in person every single Friday, and put in that time and effort to have the writing practice and whatnot.
Okay, let
So,
me ask you this. What if you have a lot of time and motivation, but no exposure to the language whatsoever? Can you learn it?
Probably, but not as well as you can with all three of them.
Yeah, the exposure, actually getting the interaction and talking and listening and reading and practice. Without that, but what if you have exposure and you're very motivated?
Yeah.
You have the exposure and the motivation, but you only study the language for one day. How's that gonna work out? Not enough time, right? But do you see how, if you take these three elements, if you remove any one of those things, it makes it nearly impossible. Like if you have the exposure and the time, but you're not motivated, it's difficult. Now you can have extrinsic or intrinsic motivation, either way, right? You can be motivated by external or intrinsic or internal factors. So there seems to be a very strong connection between, or among, I'm going to say among because among three, between A, B, right? So there is a connection among these three things, right? You remove any one of the out of the equation, and then the learning of that second language becomes almost impossible. Number 7, boy, if I could have been this person, unfortunately not. However, there's people that learn 7, 8, 9, 10 languages. I mean, they're incredible. So have you noticed that some people have a knack for learning a second language? Why might it be easier for some to learn a second language than others? Is there any factors that might make it easier or more difficult for a person?
Maybe more exposure.
yeah.
Okay, so depending on whether you're in the environment where you have the exposure, for example, for you learning Spanish, right? What if you attended a Spanish-speaking church every Sunday and you attended all their social activities during the week?
Oh, yeah.
And every
Definitely.
single thing that you did was in Spanish. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
So you're putting yourself into a situation where you hear, and believe it, there are many Spanish-speaking churches all over SoCal, believe me. If you're a Christian, whatever the religion is, you
Yeah.
pick it. There's a Spanish-speaking church for that, believe me.
Yeah. And,
What else
Professor
here? So
Butler?
maybe exposure.
yeah, I was gonna say like what she said, so exposure, so I'm thinking like maybe like you have a parent in your household who speaks Spanish, and yeah, like you have one who speaks English, so you're getting both, maybe, yeah, so like I think of even a household in a way.
So like I have a kid in where I work. I work with preschoolers. So
You work with
he's
preschoolers.
so he just turned 3, but
Okay.
he has no language. Like he doesn't speak, and mom speaks only Spanish and dad speaks kind of both, but it seemed like he mostly speaks English, a little bit of Spanish. And I thought they're teaching him English, and I just think that it's so weird that mom only speaks Spanish. Why would you only teach him English? And then he doesn't speak. So I'm assuming that like he's not really getting very, very much exposure at all to either one. Because
He'll learn Spanish at some point. He'll have to because of his mom.
Yeah.
His mom is going to be talking to him all day. He's going to learn Spanish.
yeah, I don't know. He's very responsive. He understands everything we tell him. but reciprocating the information.
In that case, I mean, I don't want to give advice, but I would think he should, in my opinion, he should learn Spanish at home and he'll pick up English just by being at school with his peers.
Right.
I don't see any need to teach him English at home, but I would interact with that kid in Spanish. I mean, his family speaks, his mom speaks it.
Dad, we speak only English in
Yeah,
class.
I mean, if he just keeps showing up for school and then he speaks Spanish all day long at home, he'll be bilingual. He'll have both of the languages. It won't be a major issue. Okay, so let me ask you this. Can everybody be a Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant of basketball?
No,
What if you practice 5 hours or 6 hours every day? Can you be a Michael Jordan?
I think you'd have to start from being little, I feel.
Right?
But I think some
But
people.
even
are
if you
used to
start
it.
at a young
Yeah.
age, not everybody, I'm gonna say not everybody has that. When I say the knack for learning the language, I'm talking more about the genetics, the cognitive kind of stuff here. So some people they might be just more predisposed to learning a new language as opposed to others. People like me, it's like hitting my head against a brick wall for a few years and, at the end of it, I have something going on. Just the sheer effort, right? I spent tons and tons of effort to do. I'll give you one more example. When I was I went to the RCC way back in the 80s, right? In the late 80s, and one of my roommates there, we were all distance runners. You can't get scholarships at a community college, but we were all scholarship athletes. And at the time I was running, I think 95 to 100 miles a week. And I was running with a guy from Kenya named Julius Kariuki. So we did all the same workouts, did everything together. And he did the long runs and so on and so forth. He went to the Olympics for Kenya and won a gold medal in the steeplechase in the Seoul Olympics. And I didn't even barely make state in track and field. Didn't even place. But we did the same stuff and we worked equally hard, but he was a much better athlete. He was a world-class athlete. I was more of a competitive athlete in the state, but not on a world level. So it kind of relates to that, is not everybody has the gift necessarily to learn multiple languages. Some people, for whatever reason, they seem to be a little bit better at it. But the one thing that we do know is that anybody, if you put yourself in a situation, right, and you just out of sheer exposure and sheer work, anybody can learn almost any language, even as an adult, if you stay at it long enough, right? So learning a language could take years, 5, 10 years or whatever. But if anybody here, if you got a grasp on the Spanish language to a degree, and then you went to Mexico for 20 years, and then you come back after 20 years, let's say you go to Mexico at age 25, you come back at 45, I guarantee you will be very similar to a native speaker. It will be nearly impossible almost to separate your fluency from a native speaker, right? So just being in that environment for so long makes a difference. Okay, let's go to the next part here. Many adults, and this is no understatement, have an extraordinarily difficult time learning a second language. Many people give up. They just simply abandon. They can't even continue on. In fact, only 5% of adults who learn a second language ever reach native speaker fluency. So why? What factors? Why is it that 95% of people who pursue a second language never achieve native speaker fluency? I could probably even say this and be pretty accurate. I could even say near native, and it would still be.
It's probably still the exposure, being, like you said, if you were in the country and like everyone around you was speaking that way, then you
So the
would
lack
probably
of
pick it up.
exposure, just not being in the environment. So most people, they don't put themselves in that environment where they're getting the language all the time.
Because it was like you said before, like when we were doing the phonology and stuff, it's not necessarily how you would sound out a word based on how it's spelled.
Okay.
It's how we talk naturally.
Yes.
So even though you might have a word and you might I can't like specifically think of something offhand, but like if you sounded it out letter by letter, that's not how we would naturally say it here. So I think that's kind of the difference.
No, that's right. The way that we pronounce things in isolation is not the same way as when we're speaking. It's like if I'm talking to somebody in Spanish, they're not going to say, ¿Cómo estás tú? Yo voy a la tienda más luego or something. They're going to be pretty fast. Me voy a la tienda más luego or something. Or vamos a la tienda juntos. Or they will speak faster. And you have the blending, right, within the thought groups. It almost sounds like if somebody says, what do you say? Where are you going? Jeep? No, Jeep. Okay, let's go to McDonald's. Jeep, right? Jeep, did you eat? So all that stuff, it's difficult to understand that in a new language. So we have many adults just simply don't have the exposure. You can say many adults, they don't have sometimes the motivation. They don't have the sheer will. They really don't have that strong desire. And remember that children who learn a new language when they're 5 or 6, they're doing it to communicate. And that's motivation. That's very motivational. Children want to socialize and things. My son's in the 7th grade now. He just loves middle school, believe it or not. He's so upset this week. What am I going to do today? He's an only child, right? Why didn't we have any siblings? I told, look, my wife had Angela. We told me she had like 4 or 5 miscarriages. I said, we'd have a big family, but it wasn't in the cards. It wasn't going to work. But he's all stressed out this week because he doesn't have the interaction with his friends and things that he normally does. So you have a lot of different factors. One of them, I think, if you think about your first language when you're 40 years old or you're 30 years old or you're 20, you've had that first language embedded into the brain for decades. Then all of a sudden you're trying to teach an old dog new tricks, kind of a thing. You're trying to teach a different pattern, right? It's like when I was playing ping pong years ago with some of my Chinese students. And he said, your first mistake is you're not holding the paddle correctly. And he showed me how to try to hold the paddle, and I wasn't used to doing that. I've been holding the paddle wrong, the racket, for decades. And to teach me to actually hold the paddle correctly, it took me like 3 months of using that new technique before I could be competitive again. It was to do something new that you're not used to doing, right? It's like going to the rec center and you're doing a weight, you're doing some weights or something. Then one of the trainers comes up and says, you're not really bracing your back when you're doing your weights, you're gonna ruin your back. So they'll show you the correct way to do it. But because you've been doing it wrong for so long, it's hard to adjust to the new technique. So there's many factors here with this, but it does say that 5%, they can reach native speaker fluency. So it is entirely possible. It's not likely, but it's possible. So think about those ideas. Now, in the next part, I'm not going to get into too much detail, but I had some of my international students, I had them give me some advice about learning English and what works for them. So you could get some ideas. You get it from the horse's mouth. So all of these people at some point were studying in an intensive English program for either 2 reasons. They wanted to get their English high enough so they could be admitted into an undergraduate or a graduate program, right? Many of my students are actually graduate students. They want to get master's, PhD degrees, stuff like that. So you can read that on your own. Okay, I'll keep going here. Get some more advice there. Okay, these are just questions that I would get. Here's the kinds of questions that you would get in if you're teaching adults. So this one says, what is different between either and neither? How to use them? So then the answer, either is a positive alternative, either or, either while or needle is going to the game. That they need to know that it means only one person is going. If I said while and needle are going, then we would say both are going, right? Neither is a negative absolute, neither nor. If I say whale nor needle is going to the game, it means no one is going. So that would be a way of answering that particular question about either versus neither. So you can see different types of grammar questions that I might get asked in an ESL classroom. Okay, how about more questions about the English language? You can look at that in your own time. You have some sample essays from advanced to beginning. You can see what's higher level type writing for ESL students. And then as you get down to the lower one, this would be, see if I can give you an example of a level 1. It's not a beginner, but a student who has a level 1 writing, it will be something like this. We can learn about communication with people from personal experience. It is the required when we make live. On the other hand, the knowledge gained from classroom instruction is required on employment or school education. I think that both of them important, but the knowledge gained from personal experience is more important than knowledge gained from classroom instruction, because communication with people instead of school, they're required when we make a living. So, I mean, this person definitely has English skills, right? But you can tell this isn't really an essay. This person doesn't understand the concept of the introduction, the body paragraphs, using topic sentences, specific details, developing the details. And there's you'll notice a lot of language use issues. So this will be a fairly lower level type student. Now, if you want to see a beginner with this, they might say, I know, understand, question. That's it. That might be all they will do at 30, and that's in 30 minutes. This person wrote this. This is an actual sample. They wrote this in 30 minutes. That's how long it took to get all that down. So, okay, let's get to the last part of today's lecture. So similar to child language acquisition, there's 3 what we consider pretty prominent theories regarding adult language acquisition. And I think similar to the theories we already talked about as it relates to children, it looks like any one theory in and of itself, it might not fully explain adult language acquisition. But if you look at all 3 theories together, you consider them together, they all do a pretty good job to explain how language is acquired, at least to some extent. So critical period theory, this would be the first one. After a certain critical period or age, humans lose the innate language abilities they had as children for acquiring a second language. The period is 6 months to puberty. So this theory says that language is time sensitive. It's important to learn it in a certain time frame. And if you learn it after that, it's going to be difficult. Not impossible, but much more difficult. So to support it, people past the critical period theory rarely acquire a second language as accurately as children do. It says children who do not acquire a first language by puberty seem to never fully acquire that first language completely. The example is Jeannie. Unfortunately, they've had a few cases where they found people, teenagers who were chained to beds, who had never been spoken to during their whole lives. They were not interacted with. They didn't have a TV. They had nothing other than they would give them food during the day, and that was it. And these people had no language. Even at 13 or 14 years old, they could not speak a first language. They could just make grunting noises and things like that. They couldn't communicate at all. And then the researcher says, okay, well, what can we do? How much can a person learn? And they found that in Jeannie and many other similar cases, they had a really big difficulty with the syntax and the phonetics, like interdental consonants, a TH, the voice and voice, those complex sounds, those complex vowels, all of that stuff. It was really, really tough. And they could not get, not even to near native speaker fluency. They just couldn't fully acquire the language at that point. Even as teenagers and into the adult years, you could always tell there's something not quite right about how they communicated. Now, they learned to communicate, don't get me wrong, right? They were able to learn, but there was a lot of limitations. So the question is, well, why are there limitations? And that goes to the critical period thing. Competition theory, this is referred to as the competing cognitive models theory. So maybe this one, it's kind of like you turn your computer on, you open up, let's say, a video editing program like Camtasia. You go online, you got Facebook open, you open all of these different applications, right? You got 20 or 30 things open at the same time. Eventually, your computer begins to slow down. In some cases, it doesn't respond. You have to Control-Alt-Delete. You have to get rid of a program or delete some things before the computer is running smoothly, right? So similarly, you have the brain is competing with all the cognitive functions in the mind. A lot of researchers believe that when you're older, there's a lot more things going on in the brain than when you're younger. And all these things kind of compete with each other. You got to worry about the day-to-day. It says what? The brain cannot devote as much mental energy to the learning of a second language due to factors such as abstract thought, logic, functions, and worries of day-to-day living. You know, all these kinds of things. So just the brain doesn't have enough room in order to learn that new language. Remember that learning a language is an enormous effort. It's a massive undertaking. In my opinion, learning Spanish was much more difficult than getting a bachelor's. Well, I got my bachelor's in Spanish. That was a disaster, right? That was really tough. But even my master's degree was very simple compared to learning a language, in my opinion. I found it the most difficult thing I've ever done. Nothing was even remotely close to that. So that would be what's called the competition theory. Now, the no difference theory, they're like, you know what? There's no critical period. You can definitely learn at any age. They say, the brain is plenty big. We don't even use 5 or 10% of it anyway. There's plenty of room in there. So these guys reject the other two areas. And they say the person is not past a critical period and the person is not cognitively competing with other mental activities. There are other factors which might affect a person's ability to learn a second language, right? And these factors are listed here. Environment. There's just simply not as much exposure to the second language as the first language. Psychological factors, anxiety, frustration, prejudice, attitude, motivation, or lack thereof. Interference from the first language. Phonetic, phonological, morphological, and syntactic frames interfere as the learner transfers these patterns from the first language, which may not work in the second language. Or you have, why might a Japanese speaker say, I sandwich egg? You guys remember from syntax, in Japanese, it's the subject, object, verb, word order, right? Or you have, why might a Spanish speaker say, look at the car red? In Spanish, the adjective, it comes after the noun, right? So you have these factors. So these are basically the three theories: the critical period theory, the competition theory, no difference theory. So the theories you will definitely see on the final exam. You'll see them and it'll be like matching. I might have the theory and match it according to his description or something, or the milestones in child language acquisition. You'll see all those questions in there. Okay, what else here? Okay, here, this is an example syllabus for a class I taught back in 2019. You can take a look at that. It shows you the kinds of things that we focus on when we're teaching adults. I think that's good enough there. Anything else I need to say today? That was all before the pandemic hit. Right before. think that's good there. Let's see if there's anything else I need to talk about. Okay, that's it. That's good enough. And then maybe on Monday, we'll get a little bit into dialects to some extent. But that's the sampling over this week with psycholinguistics with child and adult language acquisition. There we go right there. Stop this.